Translation: You look as brilliant as if you were Narayan himself. Will you kindly explain the reason that you have adopted the behavior of lower class people? Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Due to renunciation, Vedanta study, meditation, and the strict regulative principles of their daily routine, Mayavadi sannyasis are certainly in a position to execute pious activities. Thus, Prakashananda Saraswati, on account of his piety, could understand that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not an ordinary person, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sakshat Narayan. He considered him to be Narayan himself. Mayavadi sannyasis address one another as Narayan because they think that they are all going to be Narayan or merge with Narayan in the next life. Prakashananda Saraswati appreciated that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had already directly become Narayan and did not need to wait until his next life. One difference between the Vaishnava and Mayavadi philosophies is that Mayavadi philosophers think that after giving up their bodies, they are going to become Narayan by merging with his body. Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda Ki Jai. Whereas Vaishnava philosophers understand that after the body dies, they are going to have a transcendental spiritual body in which to associate with Narayan. Srila Prabhupada Ki. So in text 69, there's a very short purport. Prabhupada says, as explained in regard to verse 41, Mayavadi sannyasis do not approve of chanting and dancing. Prakashananda Saraswati, like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, misunderstood Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to be a misled young sannyasi, and therefore he asked him why he indulged in the association of fanatics instead of executing the duty of a sannyasi. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shlakaya Chakshramritam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. So Hare Krishna. So this is a very interesting verse. In this, in the text that Srila Prabhupada referred to, there's a very interesting paragraph Prabhupada writes. He says, fortunately or unfortunately, we also meet such Mayavadis who criticize our method of chanting and accuse us of not being interested in study. They do not know that we have translated volumes and volumes of books into English, and that the students in our temples regularly study them in the morning, afternoon, and evening. We are writing and printing books, and our students study them and distribute them all over the world. No Mayavadi school can present as many books as we have. Nevertheless, they accuse us of not being fond of study. Such accusations are completely false. But although we study, we do not study the nonsense of the Mayavadis. This is Srila Prabhupada at one of his best moments. Mayavad philosophy is such a dangerous thing that practically on every occasion where an opportunity is presented, Srila Prabhupada takes the opportunity to defeat that philosophy. And he does it in many humorous ways. Now this whole series that we're reading now, the story of Lord Chaitanya going to Varanasi, is very nice. The Lord actually desired the liberation of the sannyasis. It was described that when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu began his preaching movement, if you like, through him and the Panchatattva, the entire earth was inundated with a flood of love of Godhead. However, there were a few persons who somehow escaped this. And they were the Mayavadis, the impersonalist speculators, those academic scholars who were too puffed up. So all these persons completely failed to receive this great nectar of the holy name. So Mahaprabhu therefore devised this trick, that he would take sannyas. Because at least then these persons would have some impulsion, some compulsion to offer him respect. As a sannyasi, respect, it's the natural situation, that people in general will offer respect to a sannyasi, regardless of whether that is a Mayavad sannyasi or not. There are many examples from Prabhupada's early childhood where his father would invite all kinds of saintly persons around. Some of them were Mayavadis. But he made Srila Prabhupada Abhay offer obeisances to all of these sannyasis, and he would take their blessings on his head. And he would ask him, please bless my son that he would become a great devotee. So now, the Mayavadis, obviously, when they give a blessing like that, their understanding of that is somewhat different. But nevertheless, his father very much respected that principle of sannyas, that someone has taken up this very arduous and difficult task of detaching themselves from the world. Now, we all read about renunciation. It's obviously one of the accompanying features, one of the ornaments of a devotee, vairagya and vidya, knowledge and renunciation. And in the Gita we read that, especially in chapter 4, especially regarding transcendental knowledge, that there are many different ways that people can engage in devotional service. Some do it by sacrificing possessions, some do it by meditating on the Supersoul, and some do it by acquiring transcendental knowledge. And of those who engage in different activities, the highest benefit is obtained when sacrifice of possessions, or whatever we claim to be our possessions, is done in transcendental knowledge. So this transcendental knowledge is the very basis of Shastra. The very concept, the very premise that someone acts on in order to become detached from this world, that itself is glorious. Most people are engaged in this world and they're trying their hardest, sometimes helplessly, to become more and more entangled and to enjoy this world for what it is to a deeper and deeper level. Therefore you have different societies, different countries, all with different economic plans for prosperity. In certain parts of the world those plans are successful. In some other parts, despite their best efforts, the governments fail to increase sense gratification for the masses. Sense gratification generally always comes at the expense of another's. It's a competitive world with finite resources, and people try to enjoy at the expense of others. Now this is well known, but still people engage in it because the attraction to sense gratification is so deep, and it's so deep-seated and deep-rooted in the heart that most people actually do not know how to function without it. So therefore, the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the 6 Goswamis, they exemplify this mood of renunciation. Now, Srimad Bhagavatam is a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, a natural commentary, and the Mayavadis also have their commentaries. Sripad Shankaracharya, as Lord Chaitanya refers to later in this chapter, he obviously is the author of a great work. But the problem is that although the subject of study, the Vedanta Sutra, is a very glorious composition by Srila Vyasadeva, by the words of Sripad Shankaracharya, the real meaning is obscured. And a very illusory, impermanent and ultimately unsatisfying description comes out through his commentary. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu glorifies Sripad Shankaracharya, but he does not accept his philosophy. He explains that the Vedanta Sutra itself is pure. Although it is pure, it is written in a way that it is very easy to misinterpret. In the Bhagavatam itself, when Srila Narad Muni is speaking to Vyasadeva, after he has composed the Vedanta Sutra, the Mahabharata and other literatures, he explains that you have composed these great works, and this Vedanta Sutra is a wonderful work, full of scholarly wisdom. Yet somehow the real essence doesn't come out, because the natural way to understand Vedanta Sutra, with its aphorisms and great sense of logic, is to develop an impersonalist mood. Now why does this happen? Well, generally you will find anywhere where there is a mood of scholarship, a mood of applying academic techniques in order to reveal the glories of Scripture. Wherever that takes place, the mind of the person engaged in that activity has to move a little away from surrender. In order to be able to compare, criticize, constructive criticism on Scriptures, which is what academics will do. They will look at it from this point of view, from this point of view, from that point, They will look at it from different angles of vision. And then using their own intelligence, they will attempt to draw some conclusion. Now this process is 100% inherently flawed according to the instructions of Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu has explained very clearly that the subject matter of the Bhagavatam, of the Vedas, is not to be interpreted. It is to be accepted directly. The words of the Vedas are pure. Even though in the Vedas it is stated that the conch shell, which is the bone of an animal, should be used, we should not think it is impure. It is pure. There is some solid reason for it. Similarly, the stool of a cow or a bull would be considered impure according to normal material circumstances. But according to the Vedic injunctions, this is very pure. So therefore it is not possible to understand the Vedas unless one adopts a mood of surrender. While it may be possible to conduct and engage in a historical and philosophical discussion around the subject matter, it can be any subject. There are philosophers who discuss all subjects, religion, non-religion, sociology, methods of living, aspects of consciousness. But still the subject matter of the scriptural canon is hidden. It is secret and it is revealed. It is not exposed through one's scholarship or ability to accurately identify and study. So therefore this commentary of Sripad Shankaracharya is very much a scholarly work. It's a tremendous composition, but it brings out an impersonal aspect. As soon as there is a lack of surrender to the Supreme Lord and His desire, an aspect of impersonalism will always enter. It is not possible to independently assess the Lord's work and at the same time maintain surrender to it. One who considers themselves fit to assess the Lord's work, all His various compositions, Idam Bhagavatanama Puranam Brahma Samitam, all of these compositions, Krishna Veda Purana, all the Shastras, the Puranas, the histories, that person cannot surrender. Because one who has surrendered will accept as it is. And this is very much Prabhupada's mood with the Bhagavad Gita, with the Bhagavatam, and all his presentations of literature. That only a person in authorized disciplic succession has the right and the privilege, and not just that, the qualification to speak on these subject matters. So, in the Mayavad school, they have their commentary which they follow. And as later on we'll see, the sannyasis, although they engage rigidly in study of Vedanta, this of course is their main complaint in the verse preceding this one. Sannyasis, they say, are meant to study Vedanta. Meditation and the study of Vedanta are the sole duties of a sannyasi. Why do you abandon these to dance with fanatics? So they are right in one sense. Mahaprabhu allows this whole incident to take place simply to display his mercy. Of course, this incident began when a Brahmana invited Mahaprabhu to come to his house. This Brahmana was inspired by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu from within the heart. But generally, when Mahaprabhu was traveling, on this occasion in Varanasi, he would strictly avoid the company of the Mayavadi sannyasis. He would eat at the house of Tapan Mishra and he would stay at the house of Chandrasekhar. Is that the right way around? I think so. He would stay at one place and he would eat at another place, but he would strictly avoid the association of the Mayavadis. So on this occasion, somehow, by Mahaprabhu's influence, a special Brahmana came and very much pleaded with Mahaprabhu to come to his home to take prasadam. He explained that he was inviting all the other sannyasis from Varanasi also, and that Mahaprabhu should come and participate, even though he normally did not spend time socializing with the sannyasis. So Mahaprabhu accepted, and he went to the place, and he saw all the sannyasis sitting there, great staunch sannyasis, and Mahaprabhu offered them his obeisances. Then he washed his feet and went and actually sat near the place where he washed his feet, in a dirty place. He didn't come and immediately join them. So then Prakashananda, and then Mahaprabhu did something very interesting. He switched on his effulgence. He exhibited his effulgence, knowing that the Mayavadi sannyasis would be very much attracted by this. The Mayavadis are generally attracted by Brahman, as Prabhupada writes. And so they like the impersonal light of the Lord, rather than his great personal qualities and dealings. So Mahaprabhu switched on his effulgence, and the sannyasis immediately became attracted. And as we read in this verse, they started to think he was Narayan himself. Of course, they were right, but their method of thinking wasn't quite the right lines. So Prakashananda Saraswati, who was the leader of the sannyasis, he came up to Mahaprabhu and very respectfully took him into their midst and seated him. Now this Prabhupada describes is very much behavior to be appreciated. Even though Prakashananda Saraswati was misled, still he had great attraction for something saintly. And this is due to his extensive austerity, Prabhupada writes. Due to his austerity, the Mayavadi sannyasis are certainly in a position to execute pious activities. So he compares this incident to Agyata Sukriti. That somehow this sannyasi took Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, brought him into his midst and offered him some words of welcome. Then, after he was seated comfortably, he then proceeded to challenge him on different aspects of philosophy. And this is the first challenge, that meditation and study are the sole duties of a sannyasi. Why do you abandon these to dance with fanatics? So, this is interesting. The study of Vedanta is, of course, very important. In order for one to attempt to renounce this world, one needs transcendental knowledge. The consequence of transcendental knowledge, as Prabhupada writes, and as Prahlad Maharaj explains also in Canto 7, he says that one cannot develop distaste or renunciation from the objects of this world unless one has been favored by a pure devotee. And the pure devotee's favor is what? The pure devotee's favor is that he carries with him the instructions of the scriptures in his behavior and in his recommendations. So a devotee can do that, and he can bring knowledge of the scriptures to a person. Only when a person develops a connection to transcendence can they actually become detached from the realities, the so-called realities, temporary realities of this world. Now, this is also a very interesting point, that the Mayavadis adopt this aspect of nullifying everything under the guidelines of Sripad Shankaracharya. They adopt this idea that everything is ultimately zero, or this is Buddhist philosophy, actually, that everything is ultimately zero. And then Shankaracharya comes to almost take the flow of people away from that philosophy, and therefore he establishes almost a Mayavad philosophy, where faith in the Vedas is still placed, but the actual revelation of God, the person, is hidden. So we should not see this as a defect in Sripad Shankaracharya. This is his duty. He's described as an incarnation of Lord Shiva himself. And he comes specifically under the instruction of the Supreme Lord to slowly bring people back into the line of the Vedas. So initially this philosophy is propounded, and people accept it. Why does the Mayavad philosophy seem very tasteful? If that's not a contradiction in terms. Why can Mayavad philosophy seem appealing? Yes?
We want to be God.
We want to be God, yes. That's one reason. Yes?
In Kali Yuga, relationships are quite painful because of various things. The idea of my heart philosophy beyond that. It's oneness.
Yes. So the aspect of negating something becomes their focus. Because things in this world are unpleasant, relationships are unpleasant, objects are unpleasant, all kinds of interactions we have are unpleasant, the body eventually becomes unpleasant. Therefore, the consequence is that if there is something spiritual, it must naturally be the complete opposite of all of these things. Therefore, given that things are temporary and they give misery, therefore anything spiritual, which is naturally supposed to be better, has to be devoid of all of these aspects. Therefore, there are no qualities. Nirgun, Nirakar, Nirvikalpaka. These are different terms that that Mayavadis especially use at great length to describe the Lord. In the Vedanta Sutra, these terms are used to describe the Lord. He does have no material qualities. He does have no material form. But this requires actually a great acharya to explain what this means, that the Lord has no form. This means that the Lord has no material form. So the sannyasis very much take shelter of this principle. My form gives me misery, therefore the Lord has no form. And ultimately I will also adopt the same no form that the Lord has. So this is the very basis of their understanding and their development of their philosophy. So this naturally leads to renunciation. Therefore Mayavadis will be detached from society in general, especially sannyasis. Now these Mayavadi sannyasis, it is one of their ornaments that they detach themselves from social aspects of society. A sannyasi is supposed to do that. He's supposed to be dead to social interaction. That's one of their expectations. Generally, social interactions are what? What is the purpose of pretty much all social interactions in this world? Yes. Yes. We're acting in our false identity, and now that false identity teaches us that I am the enjoyer. I am the enjoyer of all I survey. I am the Lord of all I survey. And therefore, different social interactions work in some way or other to increase the level of sense gratification that one gets, individually or collectively. So that's the process of social interaction. So a sannyasi, when they detach themselves from that, that is very glorious. Because now here is a person who is giving up what everyone else is doing. And they are moving towards a path which is very difficult, especially when you don't have the Lord at the center, the personal form of the Lord. How difficult that is to retain ras, to retain conviction and strong determination to continue. Prabhupada explains that the soul needs satisfaction, and the soul's natural state is to be in relationship. But who is that person to whom ultimate relationship should be had, with whom it should be had? That's the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna. He is the real Lord of all that we survey. He's Bhoktaram Yagyatapasam. He's the central figure who is actually the source of all our happiness, and to whom, and if we offer an attempt to please his senses, we gain great purification. The Lord, when he becomes the center of our activities, and we offer our attempts to him, then naturally a mood of renunciation will develop. It takes a little time to develop, and therefore for these sannyasis, they are definitely very much to be appreciated. Generally we will speak negatively about Mayavadi sannyasis. And that has its place, but again, as Mahaprabhu explains later, it's not so much the persons that are at fault. As he explained, Sripad Shankaracharya is not at fault. He has a purpose, but his philosophy is distasteful, and therefore we don't follow it. So similarly, Mayavadi sannyasis who behave like this, they have qualities which are to be glorified. At the same time, the path they are going down is a path that we do not want to connect with. So it's that old saying of hate the sin, not the sinner. Because we know that ultimately everyone is a pure spirit soul, and through different aspects of covering, we will act in different ways. Those different coverings that we're under, they are temporary. They are not meant to be taken as the all in all. For a short period of time we have this body, we have our mind, we have our intelligence, we have our senses, all of which are sitting places of lust as it's described in the Gita. They are not the permanent situation. So when devotees need some encouragement, that's always a very useful thing to remember. These difficulties, struggles, austerities that we go through in this body, they're actually really nothing too significant. They are a temporary situation which we just have to tolerate, work through, and eventually we will transcend that. The way we transcend it is not by becoming one with the Supreme Lord, by becoming Narayan, by developing a tremendous effulgence. That's not our process. Our process is that one becomes situated in the highest happiness when one is a servant of the Supreme Lord. So when one becomes a servant of the Supreme Lord and engages their life in satisfying his senses, then the Supreme Lord may offer them different types of liberation. There are different types of liberation that are discussed. And liberation, moksha, is one of the goals of spiritual life, right? At least at least general spiritual life. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. These are 4 principles which are to be found in spiritual life. And moksha is generally the one which most people neglect. At least if they accept moksha, then it's a very unclear understanding. It's generally a Mayavad type of understanding. Now the Lord offers different types of liberation to His devotees. Salokya, sarshti, samipya, sarupya, and ekatvam. Different liberations are there. You can live on the same planet as the Lord. You can have the same form as the Lord. You can be a personal associate of the Lord. You can have the same level of wealth as the Lord, if the Lord desires. Or you can become one with the Lord. Ekatvam. Now, generally, devotees, they reject all of these things. Lord Kapila Dev, when he instructs Devahuti, he explains in this verse that Vina mat sevanam jana, that persons reject these different types of liberation, although they are offered by the Supreme Lord, if they come at the expense of personal service to the Supreme Lord. When one is engaged in the lotus feet of serving the lotus feet of the Lord, whatever state of liberation one is in, that is almost inconsequential. Liberation is described as just an insignificant side effect of a devotee's real development of spiritual ecstasy. We know that the stage of liberation, Brahmabhuta Prasanatma, Nasochati, Nakangshati, is a basic standard which, yes, some of these Mayavadis are experiencing. Through their strict following of Vedanta, through their strict austerities, yes, their Sochati and Kangshati is definitely much reduced. We don't know if it's reduced to nil, but at least they are very much less disturbed by different material activities. And that brings about a certain purity of mind. In the Gita it's explained, isn't it, that for one who has conquered the mind, the super soul is already reached. So to be in that steady state where all those various aspects which disturb us in our daily lives, those have been controlled, that immediately brings us quite close to becoming perfect. So as we see later, these sannyasis, Mahaprabhu goes into an extensive preaching dialogue with them. Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda ki. The Supreme Lord, He answers their questions very respectfully and very carefully. He explains in relation to this accusation, why do you abandon these to dance with fanatics? He explains that actually my Guru, thinking me to be a fool, instructed me to always keep the holy name of Krishna on my lips. And now what happens is, when I chant the holy name of Krishna, naturally great feelings arise within me. And I automatically begin to sing and dance. He says, please believe me, I'm not doing these things artificially. I'm not deliberately engaging in this process of chanting and dancing. These things are happening automatically to me, outside of my control, as soon as I take the holy name of Krishna. So the Mayavad sannyasis, on hearing this, were very much pacified. Because they, as we read, are very much averse to chanting, dancing, any activities which are predominantly found in social interactions. Right? You see chanting and dancing going on up and down the country. We may feel very happy when a large number of people, maybe 5,000 people, come to a Kirtan Mela. Well, if you go to Wembley Stadium and observe a concert, there could be 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000. If you go to these great festivals, Glastonbury, I don't know what the numbers are. Singing and dancing and social interaction is what the mass of people like. Therefore the sannyasis keep away from it. That's the main reason. And because they have actually no understanding of the spiritual counterpart to this material chanting and dancing, they totally reject the whole principle altogether. So Mahaprabhu very firmly establishes that when a devotee naturally develops great feelings for the Supreme Lord, great feelings of transcendental emotion for the Lord, a whole range of symptoms may be displayed. The desire to glorify the Lord, to chant about Him, to explain His greatness to anyone and everyone, that is one symptom of someone who is advanced. It's something that just naturally comes. In the initial stages, as Prabhupada says, we may need to force ourselves to dance. But how long will you force yourself? It's always nice sometimes in the morning program, where at a certain point of the mantra we all start dancing a particular step. Nama Om begins, and immediately we start the Chaupati step. Well, that's nice. But that's not on the level of dancing that Mahaprabhu is speaking of here. That's the initial, almost the sadhana dancing. That's the dancing by regulation, where we engage in that in order to train ourselves and make us familiar with a process that we are unfamiliar with. Because naturally we're not used to dancing in front of the Lord. It's actually a very unique aspect that is almost found only amongst Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Certain other areas. Generally, if you, as someone was telling me yesterday, if you go to different temples in South India, the Garbhagriha, it would be a very small area. Literally, all you would do is you would go there, take darshan of the deity and come out. Generally, all other activities would take place outside the temple. You wouldn't spend too much time in the innermost sanctum of the place. But this Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission specifically is that we come before the Lord. This Pancharatriki marg that we are following, this process of deity worship and a whole list of activities, is generally a process in the awe and reverence, but this aspect of chanting and dancing is very much a connected process. So that, it's described, gives more pleasure to the Lord than our efforts of renunciation and our efforts of strict sadhana, etc. So that it takes time to develop. That natural mood, that natural spontaneity, that natural desire to serve the Lord without compulsion, that is something hopefully we're all working towards. And that's something which when it arrives, when it lands on us, so to say, that will really give us that taste that gives us renunciation. Vairagya vidya nija bhakti yogam shikshartameka purusha puranam Shri Krishna Chaitanya sharire dhari kripam vidiyastamaham prapadyate. This great Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has come specifically, bringing with him these qualities of renunciation and knowledge. Ultimately, knowledge that is not connected to the Lord is useless. Now, some Mayavadis, obviously, particularly if they happen to be more like Brahmavadis, we cannot say that their knowledge is completely wasted, because they are connecting to an aspect of the Lord. Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yaj jnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. The Supreme Lord does have three features. He does have this impersonal Brahman aspect, the Paramatma aspect, and the great personal form is Bhagavan. So somehow if there is a connection, that person may be helped. But in Mahaprabhu's mission, he explains that for one to experience great bliss and satisfaction, ecstasy of the soul, that can only happen in a direct spiritual connection to the Supreme Lord. So therefore, especially in this Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, this focus on Mahaprabhu chanting, dancing, Sankirtan, that is the prime. It is the prime goal. The Sankirtan mission is the prime benediction for humanity. Indeed, we're all really counting on it, because our ability to follow any other process is non-existent. When the Bhagavatam was compiled, Vyasadeva was requested, through discussions with Narad Muni, that this Vedanta Sutra, all of these literatures you've compiled, they're very difficult to understand. And people, due to their very faulty qualities, they use those literatures simply to encourage their own sense gratification. Therefore, we need a literature which very clearly establishes the worship in devotion of the Supreme Lord as the highest goal. So therefore, that is Bhagavatam. And Mahaprabhu's pastimes are literally all a manifestation of the principles of the Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam is quoted again and again throughout these pages. It is the essential bhakti shastra that we take as our guiding force in this world. The Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavatam, and the practical illustration of it, Chaitanya Charitamrita, these are the guidelines for us for devotional service. But we can take good lessons from the Mayavadis even. We can learn that the Lord, through this example, He would keep away from them. He wouldn't associate with them. Yet when an opportunity presented itself to actually philosophically establish what is the highest principle, the Lord didn't shy away from that. He went there, He engaged with them, He spoke to them, and He completely won over their hearts. The entire Mayavad contingent was converted. to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, if you like. Well, they're Gaudiyas, but converted to specific devotional exposition. This is Mahaprabhu's power. He can do this. And Prabhupada also wanted that devotees should be reluctant to associate with Mayavadis because it's very dangerous. Our devotional creeper can be destroyed by it, especially if one is not strong enough. So the only circumstances under which one associates with that is for the sake of establishing the proper Siddhanta. Because as devotees we should not be afraid to do that. When Prabhupada came over, he explained that these Western countries are full of voidism and impersonalism. One of his specific goals, Mahaprabhu's goals, is to rid the world of this. Because this philosophy will not satisfy everyone, or anyone. It will lead to a very depressed state. We see this in the behavior of the Mayavadis. Because their practice does not give them natural ecstatic bliss, therefore they remain very reserved and remain distant from chanting and dancing. Yet someone who experiences great bliss and great love will naturally demonstrate these symptoms. So you have living proof in the behavior of different religious practitioners. Those who are actually joyfully experiencing the process, those are the ones for whom that process will be real, again and again. Whether the inspiration comes or goes, they will remain steady, and they will see it through to its completion. So we can pray to Mahaprabhu that this great Sankirtan mission that he has broadcast across the world, that it can also reach us. Obviously certain persons are not eligible to receive this great mercy, even though Mahaprabhu's intention is that it goes to everyone. So we can please pray to Mahaprabhu, Lord Nityananda, that he opens our hearts and makes our heart a fertile place, that we can actually receive this holy name and dance in ecstasy. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki. Jai. Any questions, comments?